Welcome back to Sleepy Historian. Tonight we are drifting somewhere that many people imagine in golden candlelight. Venice. Perhaps you picture music carried across water, soft masks, silk sleeves brushing marble balconies, gondolas gliding beneath pale moonlight. But if you had truly lived there in the 1700s, not as a visitor, not as a noble for a single evening, but as an ordinary person waking every morning inside its walls, you would have known something quieter, something heavier. Venice did not float effortlessly. It endured. Before we go further, allow your breathing to slow just a little. Inhale gently through your nose. Hold and exhale. There is no rush here. The water moves slowly. So will we. If you find comfort in long, steady journeys through history, you may consider subscribing or returning again when you need a place where the past unfolds without urgency. But for now, simply settle in, because within the first few steps into 1700s Venice, one truth becomes clear. The city was not built on solid ground. It stood on wood, thousands upon thousands of wooden piles, driven deep into mud beneath the lagoon centuries earlier, held up stone palaces and cramped apartments alike. Those beams remained underwater, preserved by the absence of oxygen, but everything above them, the floors beneath your feet, the walls beside your bed, existed in a state of negotiation with dampness. You would have smelled it immediately. Not perfume, not pastry, salt, algae, wet rope, a faint sweetness of rot carried from canals that did not flow swiftly enough. You wake before sunrise. The room is dim, the air cool and slightly moist. The plaster wall near your bed feels colder than the air itself. When you press your palm against it, you sense the stored chill of night. This is not dramatic discomfort, it is simply constant. Water presses against the edges of the city at all times. Even when unseen, it is present, below the floor, beyond the threshold, beneath the street stones. The tide rises, the tide falls, and your day adjusts accordingly. Venice in the 1700s was already past its brightest peak as a maritime empire. Trade routes had shifted toward the Atlantic. Other powers grew stronger. But inside the lagoon, daily life did not pause for geopolitical decline. You still had to fetch water. You still had to work. You still had to dry your clothes somewhere in air that never felt entirely dry. There is something quietly unsettling about living in a place that is both magnificent and fragile. From a distance, domes rise gracefully. Facades glow in evening light. But up close you notice salt crusting along lower stones. You see wood darkened by repeated soaking. You watch men patching foundations, reinforcing doorways, repairing steps that crumble slowly, grain by grain. Nothing collapses suddenly. Instead, everything leans, very slightly, always. If you lived here, you would learn to measure time not only by church bells but by watermarks along walls. A pale line from yesterday's high tide, a darker stain from last month's flooding, subtle rings of memory inscribed in brick, and yet life continues. Children run along narrow calle, the thin pedestrian streets. Women lean from windows to shake linens. Gondoliers push off from worn stone edges. Bakers rise before dawn to knead dough in rooms lit by oil lamps. You would not think of yourself as living in a fragile city. You would think of yourself as living. But beneath that simple truth is an unspoken understanding. The lagoon allows this existence, and the lagoon could, slowly, reclaim it. Pause for a moment and notice your own breathing again. Inhale, exhale. Imagine the faint echo of footsteps on stone stairs, the distant knock of wood against wood as a small boat shifts in its mooring, the soft slap of water against a wall just beyond your window. There are no carriages rattling over cobblestones here, no horses, no wheels on most streets. Movement is either by foot or by boat. That means everything, food, furniture, firewood, arrives across water. If storms roll in from the Adriatic, if tides rise unusually high, daily rhythms falter. Deliveries delay, markets thin, people wait. Venice teaches patience. It also teaches constraint. Space is limited. Expansion is impossible. The city cannot simply spread outward. It is bound by water and marsh. So buildings grow upward, rooms narrow. Families crowd together in tall houses that seem to lean toward one another, as if sharing secrets across the alley. Light filters down in thin vertical strips. Laundry hangs overhead like soft banners between windows. You would wake to the muffled sounds of neighbors through shared walls. A cough, a whispered argument, the scrape of a chair across tile. Privacy is thin. Air circulates poorly. In summer heat settles and lingers, trapped between stone and canal. In winter damp cold seeps into blankets and bone alike. And yet, this is not misery. It is simply the condition of living here, a constant negotiation between beauty and discomfort, between ceremony and survival. As we move slowly through this night together, you will come to understand what sustained ordinary Venetians in the 1700s and what quietly exhausted them. You will see how class divided experience, how nobles occupied vast palazzi with painted ceilings, while laborers climbed dark stairwells to small rented rooms, how carnival masks could briefly conceal hierarchy but not erase it, how disease lingered in marshy edges, how faith echoed through churches built on unstable ground. You will begin to sense how a republic nearing its final century still carried itself with ritual dignity, even as foundations shifted below. For now, though, we remain at the threshold, standing on damp stone at dawn. The lagoon air cool against your face, the sky slowly lightening from deep indigo to muted gray-blue. You hear a bell in the distance, then another. The sound travels across water differently than across land. It seems to hover, to expand gently outward before fading. This is how your day begins, not with spectacle, but with awareness. Awareness of moisture in the air, of narrowness in space, of the slow pulse of tide beneath the city, and perhaps as you settle more deeply into stillness now, you begin to understand the quiet truth beneath the romantic image. Venice in the 1700s was not a dream suspended on water. It was a working city, a damp city, a city that endured by habit and maintenance and patience. And if you lived here, you would learn to endure in much the same way. Let your breathing soften again. The tide is turning. We will step carefully onto the worn stone edge and look downward into the water that holds everything up. If you live in 1700s Venice, you do not often see what holds you up. You trust it, but you do not see it. Beneath your feet, beneath the stone threshold you step over each morning, are forests that no longer grow. Thousands of wooden piles driven deep into the mud centuries ago stand tightly packed together below the waterline. Alder, oak, larch. Entire trunks sharpened and hammered downward until they struck firmer sediment. Upon those forests of wood rest platforms. Upon the platforms, stone. Upon the stone, walls. Upon the walls, your bed, your table, your small chest of clothing. You wake on something that is not earth, and you learn not to think too much about that. Inhale slowly. The air is faintly briny. Even indoors, your room is narrow as many are. The plaster along the lower wall shows faint rippling patterns where moisture has risen and dried and risen again. You notice it without alarm. It has always been there. You place your feet onto the floor. It is cool, not sharply cold, just persistently cool, as though the stone remembers the lagoon beneath it. When you step outside, the early light reveals the canal level lower than yesterday's mark. The tide has retreated during the night. Dark green strands of algae cling to steps that descend into the water. The lowest stair glistens. You measure your mornings by this. If the tide is low, deliveries may move more easily. If it is high, you prepare for inconvenience. Venice is governed by water more faithfully than by any council, and the water is never still. You stand for a moment and listen. The sound is subtle, a soft lapping against stone, a hollow knocking as a moored boat shifts gently. Somewhere farther down the canal, a gondolier adjusts his oar in its forcola, the carved wooden rowlock that allows the blade to pivot. The city breathes through these sounds. If you press your palm to the outer wall near the canal, you feel faint vibration when a boat passes. It is not dramatic, just a small shiver, like a body adjusting in sleep. This is how Venice rests, never fully motionless. The wooden piles beneath the buildings remain submerged. That is their protection. Exposed to air, they would rot quickly, but underwater, sealed from oxygen, they harden over time. They become something closer to mineral than wood. Still, you understand that maintenance is constant. Men descend in small boats to inspect lower stones. Masons patch mortar where salt has eaten into it. Cracks are watched carefully, not with panic, but with routine attention. Nothing here collapses suddenly. It surrenders slowly. You walk along a fondamenta, the narrow walkway beside a canal. The stone beneath you slopes almost imperceptibly toward the water. Generations of feet have worn shallow depressions into the surface. In certain places, bricks have been replaced where erosion proved too persistent. You notice the faint white crust along the base of buildings. Salt. When high tide presses against walls, water seeps into porous stone. Later, when the tide falls and moisture evaporates, salt remains behind. It gathers in powdery blooms. It flakes the surface over years. If you live here long enough, you can read the history of tides along the wall of your own house. Some winters bring acqua alta, unusually high water that spills over thresholds and into ground floors. It does not arrive like a crashing wave. It creeps. At first the canal simply appears fuller. Then the lowest step disappears. Then water spreads thinly across the stone walkway, shallow enough that you can see the cobbles beneath its surface. You lift your skirts. You remove your shoes. You move your shoes. You move carefully. Inside, boards are placed beneath furniture legs. Rugs are rolled up. You wait. The water leaves as quietly as it came. But each visit leaves a memory in wood and plaster. You return home at midday. The light filtering into the stairwell is dim and vertical. Stone steps spiral upward, worn smooth in the center from centuries of use. You trail your hand lightly along the inner wall as you climb. The wall is cool, always cool, even in summer, because beneath the building, beneath the wooden piles and the compressed mud, the lagoon holds its own temperature, slower to change than air, slower to respond to sun. You sometimes wonder what it would feel like to live on firm soil, to dig downward and strike dry earth, but you have never known that sensation. Instead, you know the quiet resilience of timber submerged in darkness. At night, when the city settles, you may hear small sounds that others would ignore. A faint creak. A low shifting tone as wood responds to pressure or tide. These sounds are not warnings. They are conversations between structure and water. You grow accustomed to them. They become part of the rhythm that lulls you toward sleep. Maintenance is woven into daily life here. Stonecutters, carpenters, laborers. Their work is rarely grand, rarely celebrated, but without them, Venice would soften into the lagoon over time. If you pass a site where repairs are underway, you see scaffolding rising from boats instead of from streets, workers balance carefully, tools hanging from belts. They chip away damaged stone and fit new pieces into place. There is no rush, only repetition, because the lagoon will return tomorrow, and the next day, and the next year. You sit at the edge of a canal in late afternoon and watch the water darken as clouds pass overhead. A slight wind ripples the surface. Reflections of windows distort and reform. The building across from you appears steady, but in the water it trembles. It is a gentle reminder. Nothing here is entirely fixed. And yet the city has stood for centuries. That knowledge is both comforting and quietly humbling. You are not defying the water. You are cooperating with it. Your existence depends on balance, on wood kept wet, on stone kept patched, on tides respected. In winter, when cold air drifts down from the north and settles over the lagoon, dampness penetrates more deeply. Blankets feel heavier, walls sweat faintly. You place extra cloth near the base of doors to block drafts. In summer, heat brings another kind of discomfort. The canals emit stronger smells. Algae thickens. Insects gather near the marshy edges beyond the main islands. But through each season the foundations remain submerged, silent, hidden, carrying weight without complaint. As evening approaches now, the tide begins to rise again. You can see it along the steps. The dark line creeps upward, covering earlier marks. Boats lift slightly against their ropes. The city adjusts. You adjust, and perhaps as you stand there watching water reclaim a few inches of stone, you understand something essential about life in 1700s Venice. It is not a city suspended above water. It is a city in constant conversation with it. You live not on solid certainty, but on patient engineering and daily attention. And that is enough, for now. Let your breathing slow again. Imagine the wooden forest beneath you, steady in darkness, untouched by air. The tide is still rising. It always is. If you live in 1700s Venice, you live upward. There is almost nowhere else to go. The islands cannot expand. The marsh does not welcome new construction easily. So buildings stretch toward the sky, thin, vertical, leaning slightly toward one another across streets so narrow that neighbors might pass a basket from window to window without lowering it to the ground. You stand at the entrance of your building and look up. 4 stories, sometimes 5. Each level divided into rooms smaller than you might expect from the elegance seen along the Grand Canal. Because you do not live along the Grand Canal. You live in the shadowed veins of the city. The calai, the narrow pedestrian streets, admit only a ribbon of sky. In the morning, light arrives as a pale strip along the upper walls. It descends slowly, but it never fully fills the space. By afternoon, the opposite wall glows faintly, then dims again. Most of your day passes in filtered light. You climb the stairs again, stone, worn at the center. The air changes as you rise. Cooking smells gather between levels, olive oil heating in a pan, onions softening, fish cleaned earlier that morning. There is also the faint scent of damp plaster, of wool drying, of human closeness. You know your neighbors' routines without meaning to. You hear their steps, their coughs, the creak of their bed frames at night. Privacy is thin here, like the shutters that close across your window. When you enter your room, it is modest. A bed pushed against the wall. A small wooden table. A chest containing linens and perhaps one change of clothing. The ceiling beams are visible overhead. Dark wood, slightly bowed from age. If you trace your fingers along them, you feel splinters softened by years of smoke and dust. There may be 2 rooms, if fortune favors you, or 1. If you share the space with family, beds are arranged carefully to allow passage between them. Children sleep near walls, adults near the door. Air moves slowly through the room. When you open the shutters, you do not receive a grand view. You see another wall, perhaps 6 or 7 feet away. A line of laundry strung between windows sways gently. A neighbor leans out to shake crumbs from a cloth. You nod. You both withdraw. During the day, the room grows warmer as sunlight touches the upper wall, but the lower half remains cool. The stone floor beneath your feet never truly warms. Even in summer, when the air outside feels heavy and stagnant, the stone retains its own temperature, influenced by the lagoon below. In winter, this coolness deepens. You place rugs where you can. You stuff cloth into cracks along the window frame. You hang heavier fabric across the doorway to slow drafts that slip down the stairwell. But dampness persists. It is not an enemy. It is a condition. You wipe condensation from the inside of the window on certain mornings. You hang linens near the stove, though they dry slowly. Mold sometimes forms in corners where air does not circulate well. You scrape it away, quietly, without complaint. Life here is not dramatic. It is repetitive. You wake. You descend the stairs. You step into the narrow street where voices echo softly between walls. Sound behaves differently in these confined passages. A whisper can travel farther than expected. Footsteps reverberate. Sometimes, if you pause in the middle of a call at dusk, you hear layers of life overlapping. A baby crying from above, water slapping against stone at the end of the lane, someone chopping vegetables behind a shutter, a distant bell marking the hour. The street itself is barely wide enough for two people to pass without turning slightly sideways. When rain falls, it runs quickly along the worn stone surface, gathering in shallow depressions. If high tide coincides with rain, water may pool where drainage cannot keep pace. You step carefully then, lifting the hem of your garment. Returning home in such weather, you carry dampness with you. Shoes leave faint prints along the floor before drying. You sit at your table in late afternoon light. The room grows dim earlier than you expect. The narrowness of the street blocks the sun before it is truly set. You light an oil lamp. The flame flickers against the plaster, revealing uneven textures in the wall. Shadows stretch across the ceiling beams. You mend a sleeve. You trim a candle. You fold cloth. Time passes without spectacle. Outside, voices fade gradually as evening deepens. Gondoliers guide final passengers home. The city settles into quieter rhythms. Upstairs and downstairs, neighbors shift in their rooms. You hear a chair dragged across tile, a door close softly, someone clearing their throat. The building itself seems to hold all these small sounds. It absorbs them. If you lie still long enough, you may even sense the subtle vibration when a boat brushes against the foundation below. It is not alarming. Just a reminder that you live suspended above movement. In summer, heat lingers within these narrow spaces. Air grows thick. You open the shutters wider, hoping for circulation. But the opposite wall remains close. Breeze arrives only occasionally, slipping down the canal and into the alley like a shy visitor. Sweat gathers at the back of your neck. Fabric clings lightly to skin. You sleep more restlessly then. In winter, the opposite problem persists. The damp cold enters quietly and stays. You wrap yourself in wool. You warm your hands near coals. Yet the chill returns as soon as the fire dims. Many families here share similar conditions. Above you, another room mirrors yours almost exactly. Below you, another. Each separated by wood and stone, thin enough to transmit life. You do not think of it as crowding. You think of it as proximity. The city teaches you to accept closeness, to adjust your voice, to time your movements, to recognize patterns of those around you. Sometimes when illness passes through a building, it moves from room to room with unsettling predictability. A cough below becomes a fever above. You notice the sequence. You hope it skips your door. Most days it does. Life continues. You carry water up the stairs. You carry refuse down. You adjust to the verticality of existence. Venice from afar appears horizontal, domes, bridges, canals stretching outward. But daily life is lived in ascents and descents. Climb, descend, climb again. Your legs grow accustomed to it. Your breathing adjusts. Your body learns the rhythm of stairs as naturally as it learns the rhythm of tide. As night settles now, your room becomes a small enclosure of warmth against the damp world beyond. The oil lamp burns low. The walls reflect a faint amber glow. You sit quietly. You listen. The city does not roar. It murmurs. And in these narrow rooms above narrow streets, you understand something simple. Venice is not defined by its grand facades. It is defined by the thousands of small rooms stacked carefully atop one another, each containing a life lived in repetition and quiet endurance. You lie down. The ceiling beams loom above, dark and steady. Beyond the wall, a neighbor turns in sleep. Below, water touches stone. The city rests, but never completely. And neither do you. If you live in 1700s Venice, you do not measure distance the way others do. You measure it in crossings, in tides, in the time it takes for a boat to glide from one bend of canal to another. There are streets, yes, narrow stone paths winding between buildings, but sooner or later, each path ends at water, and when it does, you wait, or you row, or you hire someone who rows. You stand at the edge of a small canal in early morning. The sky is pale and undecided, somewhere between gray and faint gold. The water is darker than the sky, holding its own depth of color. A boat approaches slowly, not for spectacle, for necessity. The gondola in the 1700s is not primarily romance. It is transport. It is delivery. It is the extension of your own legs when stone runs out. The gondolier stands at the stern, balanced with habitual ease. His oar moves in a steady arc, not hurried, not theatrical. The blade dips, pulls, lifts. The boat advances with quiet authority. If you board, you step carefully. The vessel shifts beneath your weight. It is a small reminder you are not on fixed ground. You sit low. The sides of the boat rise just high enough to protect against small waves. You pass doorways that open directly onto water. Stone steps descend from buildings into the canal. Some are slick with algae, where the tide has recently withdrawn. As you move, the city reveals itself from a different angle. Walls that appear solid from the street show signs of long conversation with water when viewed from the canal. Stains mark former tide levels. Patches of repaired brick interrupt older masonry. Wooden poles stand upright along the edges, their surfaces smoothed by ropes tied and untied countless times. You glide beneath a bridge. The echo changes. Sound compresses briefly, then expands again. In Venice, water is road, but it is also barrier. If the tide is low, certain routes become difficult. Boats scrape bottom. Gondoliers choose alternate paths. If the tide is high, stone walkways flood, and those without boats wait on higher ground. You learn quickly that schedules are suggestions. Tide is authority. There are days when you must cross the city for work or trade. You calculate not only distance but timing. Will the water rise before you return? Will wind from the Adriatic push it higher than expected? You stand at the edge of a flooded square during Aqua Alta. The water spreads thinly across stone, transforming the familiar into something reflective and uncertain. The buildings seem doubled, one above, one below, trembling in the shallow mirror. You remove your shoes. You step carefully. The water is cold against your ankles. It ripples outward with each movement. You are not frightened. You are attentive. Shops close their lower shutters. Wooden planks are placed across thresholds. Some families retreat upstairs until the water recedes. The city does not panic. It adjusts. Because water here is not an intruder. It is a partner with moods. In summer, canals narrow slightly as evaporation and tide patterns shift. The surface becomes thicker with algae and quieter corners. Insects hover above marshy edges beyond the main islands. The air grows heavier, carrying the scent of salt and organic decay. In winter, wind sharpens across open lagoon spaces. Waves strike more firmly against stone. Boats rock at their moorings, ropes pulled taut. At night, when movement slows, the water becomes more audible. Without daytime noise, you hear it clearly, the soft slap against foundations, the hollow knock of wood against hull, the faint gurgle where a small current squeezes between buildings. If you wake in darkness, you may lie still and listen. The tide becomes your clock, rising, falling. It marks time more reliably than any mechanical device. When you walk along a fondamenta at dusk, you notice how reflections lengthen across the canal. Windows glow in soft amber. The surface shimmers gently, disturbed only by occasional passing boats. You pause. The water is never entirely smooth. Even on calm evenings, subtle motion persists. The lagoon breathes with the pull of distant sea currents. The entire city shifts by increments too small to measure consciously. You live above this motion. You carry baskets of goods along walkways, mindful of slick edges. You wait for ferries at wider crossings. You watch boatmen maneuver cargo, barrels of wine, sacks of grain, bundles of fabric through narrow turns that demand quiet skill. Trade depends on these channels. So does daily bread. If storms delay ships entering the lagoon, markets thin slightly. Fish may be scarce for a few days. Imported goods arrive later than expected. Conversations in markets turn quietly toward weather patterns. not an alarm, just an acknowledgement. Because Venice is never isolated from the sea. It is connected to it intimately, and that connection carries both sustenance and uncertainty. You learn the texture of stone beneath wet soles. You learn how to judge depth by color, darker water indicating greater passage. You learn which bridges flood first and which remain dry longer. This knowledge is not written down formally. It passes from observation, from repetition, from small mistakes corrected over time. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel the subtle rocking of a boat beneath you, the faint tilt as someone shifts weight, the rhythmic dip of an oar. It is not dramatic motion. It is steady. You arrive at a landing. The gondolier steadies the boat with one foot against stone. You step onto solid ground again. Though solid here is always relative. Behind you the boat drifts slightly before being secured. Ahead, a narrow street climbs away from the canal. You walk upward. And as you do, you realize something essential about living here. Water is not scenery. It is infrastructure. It is pathway. It is delay. It is measure. It is memory. It determines when goods arrive, when floors flood, when walls must be repaired. It marks your day from dawn to dusk and through the night beyond. You cannot ignore it, but you also do not resent it, because without water there would be no Venice at all. As evening settles now, the tide reaches its height. Boats rise slightly against their moorings. The lowest steps disappear beneath dark surface. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the water begins to withdraw again. The city exhales. You return home, climbing stairs once more. You feel faint dampness clinging to the hem of your garment. Your hands carry the scent of rope and wood. Inside your narrow room, you pause by the window. Below, the canal reflects the last light of day. You watch the surface tremble gently. It has carried you. It has delayed you. It has shaped your movements without argument, and tomorrow it will do the same. Let your breathing match that slow rhythm now. Rising, falling, like tide against stone. If you live in 1700s Venice and you are not noble, you work, not in spectacle, not in silk, but in rope, salt, wood, and repetition. The lagoon does not sustain itself on beauty alone. Ships still arrive, cargo still moves, barrels must be lifted, sacks must be carried, crates must be transferred from hull to dock to warehouse, and if you are a dock worker or porter, your day begins before the light has fully settled across the water. You wake in dimness. Your shoulders already carry a faint memory of yesterday's labor. It is not sharp pain, it is heaviness, a familiar weight that settles into muscle and does not fully leave. You descend the stairs of your building quietly, stepping into air that smells faintly of tide and wood smoke. The sky above the lagoon is pale and uncertain. The water holds a darker tone, reflecting little. At the edge of a larger canal or near the basin where ships anchor, activity begins slowly. A vessel has arrived. Not one of the great fleets of earlier centuries, those days have passed, but a merchant ship bearing grain, timber, or wine. Trade still flows through Venice, though not with the dominance it once commanded. You stand among others waiting for instruction. There is little conversation at first. Breath clouds faintly in cool air. Ropes are cast. The ship settles against wooden posts. And then work begins. You grip coarse hemp rope. It bites into your palm slightly, leaving faint impressions that fade only partially before the next day's labor restores them. You pull. Others pull with you. The hull shifts closer to dock. Wood meets wood with a hollow sound. Barrels are rolled carefully across planks laid between ship and stone. Each one requires balance. Each one demands attention. A slip here would not be dramatic, just costly. You move in rhythm with others. Lift, carry, set down, return. The repetition is steady, almost meditative. Your boots darken where water splashes across the dock. Salt dries in pale streaks along leather. The The smell of fish lingers in certain areas where smaller boats unload their catch. Gulls circle overhead, their calls sharp against the muted soundscape of labor. As the morning advances, light spreads across the basin. It reveals faces lined not by age alone, but by routine strain. You do not speak often of exhaustion. You accept it, because the city depends on this flow of goods. Without grain shipments, bread grows scarce. Without timber, repairs stall. Without wine and oil, markets thin. You are part of the mechanism that keeps Venice upright, as necessary as the wooden piles beneath buildings. Yet your work is rarely seen by those who glide along the Grand Canal in private gondolas. You pause briefly when a foreman signals rest. You lean against a stone wall still cool from night. The surface presses against your back, grounding you. You look out across the water. The lagoon stretches wide beyond the clustered islands. On the horizon, the line between sea and sky blurs slightly. There was a time when Venice commanded distant waters. Now other powers rise along Atlantic coasts. Trade routes shift westward. You hear such things spoken occasionally in taverns, not with panic, but with subdued acknowledgement. Work continues. Decline, when it comes, arrives gradually. A few fewer ships each season. A slight delay in certain imports. Nothing dramatic, just subtle thinning. You resume lifting. A sack of grain weighs more than it appears. You adjust it across your shoulder. Fabric rubs against wool. Fine dust clings to your sleeves. By midday, fatigue settles deeper. Your movements slow slightly, though rhythm persists. You drink water from a shared container. It is not particularly cold. It carries a faint mineral taste from storage. You do not dwell on comfort. You dwell on completion. If rain begins, a light steady fall, the dock grows slick. Planks are repositioned. Work continues, but more carefully. Water runs along the grooves in stone and drips from the edge into the canal below. You feel dampness seep through clothing gradually. It does not shock. It accumulates. In summer, heat replaces rain as the challenge. The sun reflects off water, doubling its presence. Sweat gathers at the base of your neck. Salt dries along your collar. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand and continue, because stopping is rarely an option. Porters move cargo beyond the dock, into warehouses where shadows dominate. Inside, air smells of stored goods, grain, fabric, oil, sometimes spices. Dust floats in narrow shafts of light descending from small windows high above. You carry loads along narrow corridors. Stone floors echo faintly underfoot. The weight presses into your spine. You adjust posture slightly to compensate. Lift, carry, set down, return. The cycle repeats. There is no applause at the end of such a day. There is simply less cargo remaining. As afternoon fades, the basin quiets gradually. Ships rest more heavily in water. Ropes slacken slightly as tide shifts. Your hands are rougher now than in youth. Small scars mark knuckles where rope once slipped too quickly. Your shoulders slope subtly forward from years of bearing weight. And yet, you endure, because the city requires endurance more than brilliance. When you finally leave the dock, you walk slowly along the fondamenta. Muscles respond with stiffness. You do not hurry. The sky above the lagoon glows faintly amber as sun lowers. You watch smaller boats weaving between anchored vessels. Their movement is unhurried, almost graceful. You are too tired to romanticize it, but you appreciate the steadiness. At home, you climb the stairs again. Each step feels slightly steeper than it did at dawn. The narrow stairwell holds the day's lingering warmth or chill, depending on season. Inside your room, you sit before removing your boots. There is a faint ringing in your ears from sustained labor, not loud, just present. Your hands rest on your knees. For a moment you listen. Beyond the wall, neighbors move through their own routines. Somewhere outside, a gondola passes, its oar dipping steadily. You realize something quietly important. Venice's beauty rests upon invisible labor. Without the steady lift of barrels, the careful transfer of goods, the patient repetition of dock workers and porters, the city would lose its balance. Just as wooden piles hold stone above water, you and others like you hold daily life above uncertainty. There is no ceremony for this. There is only continuation. You lie down later, muscles humming faintly with residual strain. The ceiling beams above remain steady. The faint sound of water reaches your ears through stone. Tomorrow, another ship may arrive, or perhaps not. Either way, you will rise. Because survival in Venice is not dramatic. It is rhythmic, like tide against dock, lift, carry, set down, rest, and begin again. If you live in 1700s Venice and you are not hauling barrels at the docks, you may be shaping something smaller. Glass, cloth, wood, leather, metal. Your labor does not echo across open water. It settles into enclosed rooms where light is controlled and time moves in steady, measured increments. You wake before full daylight again. The narrow window of your room admits a faint gray ribbon of morning. You dress simply, wool against skin, linen beneath. You descend the stairs and step into air that still holds a trace of night coolness. Your workshop waits in shadow. Perhaps you work with glass, not in spectacle, not in grand display, but in repetition. Or perhaps you weave fabric, stitch garments, carve small objects from wood. The specifics matter less than the pattern. The day begins the same way it ended yesterday. Inside the workshop, the air smells of your trade. If you are a glassworker, heat greets you first. The furnace glows softly even before full flame. Its presence alters the air. You feel warmth against your face, dryness against your lips. Ash and soot gather in corners, softening the edges of stone walls. You take your position. The tools are arranged as they always are. Iron rods, shears, wooden molds. You move without thinking at first. Heat the rod. Gather molten glass. Rotate steadily so gravity does not distort the shape. Your arm learns the weight and resistance. The material resists lightly, then yields. You shape. You breathe carefully. You avoid haste. If you are a weaver instead, your workshop carries a different atmosphere. The loom stands tall and patient. Threads stretch in careful alignment. Light filters through high windows in thin vertical bands, illuminating floating fibers in the air. Your feet press pedals. Your hands guide shuttle and thread. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm is steady. If you are a tailor or seamstress, your world narrows further. Needle through cloth. Small precise stitches repeated thousands of times across a single garment. You bend slightly forward, shoulders rounding, eyes strain in dim light as afternoon fades. Regardless of craft, the pattern holds. Repetition, correction, repetition again. The outside world recedes. The canal beyond your door continues its quiet motion, but you may not look at it until midday. Your attention is confined to the immediate task. Shaping, stitching, aligning, smoothing. You measure time not by bells alone, but by progress. One vessel completed, one length of fabric woven, one garment finished. The city's trade may be declining compared to its earlier centuries, but artisans still supply domestic need. Everyday bowls, everyday cloth, everyday tools. Not all objects are destined for nobility or export. Many remain within these narrow islands. Heat grows in the workshop as hours pass. If near a furnace, sweat gathers at your temples. You wipe it away with the back of your wrist, careful not to disturb delicate work. Your sleeves collect faint scorch marks over time. If weaving or sewing, stiffness settles into your lower back. You adjust posture briefly, then return to your position. The loom does not pause for discomfort. The garment does not stitch itself. Light shifts across the floor, at first pale and angled, then brighter, then descending toward the opposite wall. By late afternoon, the workshop grows dim again. You light a small lamp if necessary. The flame flickers in the slight draught that slips beneath the door. Sometimes you hear footsteps outside, porters passing, neighbors conversing softly. The city continues around you, but your world remains bounded by walls, tools, and measured movement. There are days when orders are plentiful. There are days when fewer requests arrive. The slow shifting of trade routes toward Atlantic ports, toward other empires, reduces certain luxuries. Imported materials may cost more. Patrons may hesitate. You notice it not in sudden loss but in subtle thinning. A slight pause between commissions. A request for simpler designs. An emphasis on repair rather than replacement. You adapt. Because adaptation is the quiet skill of Venice. You repair cracked glass instead of crafting new elaborate pieces. You mend worn garments instead of cutting fresh cloth. You conserve fuel carefully so the furnace burns steadily without excess. Nothing collapses. It adjusts. Midday brings brief rest. You step outside. The canal air feels cooler after hours near heat or confined space. You inhale salt and damp stone. You stretch your fingers, flexing them to release stiffness. The sound of a distant bell marks the hour, traveling gently across water. You may eat a simple meal, bread, perhaps a small portion of fish, maybe a slice of cheese if fortune allows. Then you return. The second half of the day resembles the first, back and forth, heat and rotation, needle and thread, press and release. You do not think of your work as extraordinary. You think of it as necessary. The nobility may host massed gatherings during carnival season. They may order ornate glassware or elaborate garments for display. But most days of the year are quieter. Carnival ends, music fades, and ordinary objects remain. You produce those objects. In winter the workshop feels different. Cold air slips through cracks despite efforts to seal them. Your fingers stiffen before warming to motion. Breath becomes faintly visible near the door. You warm your hands near coals or furnace before resuming. In summer, heat presses downward. Sweat beads at your hairline. Fabric clings to skin. The air thickens with dust and humidity. Yet you continue. Because continuity is survival. You glance occasionally at the wooden beams overhead. They hold firm. The stone beneath your feet remains cool despite the furnace. Beneath that stone, water continues its slow conversation with foundation piles. You are part of a layered structure, above water, above wood, above mud, shaping objects that may last longer than you will. As evening approaches, you extinguish flame or cover materials carefully. Tools are returned to precise positions. The workshop grows quiet. Outside, the canal reflects amber light once more. You step into the narrow street. Your shoulders ache slightly from hours of focused posture. Your hands carry faint marks, soot, thread indentations, small nicks from tools. You do not resent these marks. They are evidence of usefulness. Climbing the stairs toward home, you feel the familiar vertical strain in your legs. The stairwell smells faintly of cooking and damp stone. Someone above laughs softly. Someone below closes a shutter. Inside your room you sit for a moment before lighting your lamp. The silence feels heavier after a day of repetitive motion. You rub your fingers slowly, easing stiffness. Beyond the wall the city continues in subdued rhythm. You realize something quietly steady. Venice's splendor is supported not only by dockworkers lifting cargo, but by artisans repeating small, precise movements in shadowed rooms. Glass shaped carefully, cloth woven patiently, garments stitched one thread at a time. No applause, no grand announcement, just continuation. You lie down. Your hands rest against the blanket, faint warmth lingering in your palms if you worked near flame, or faint stiffness if you bent over fabric all day. Outside, water touches stone again. Tomorrow, you will return to the workshop, and repeat. If you live in 1700s Venice as a woman without noble rank, your labor is rarely named. It is assumed. It begins before light settles on the canal and continues after lamps are extinguished. You wake in the dim gray before dawn. The air is cool, faintly damp. You sit up slowly so as not to disturb others still sleeping in the room. The stone floor receives your feet with its usual quiet chill. There is water to fetch. There is cloth to mend. There are meals to prepare. There are stairs to climb and descend, often more times than you count. You tie your hair back. You gather a small container and step into the narrow calle. The sky above is a thin ribbon of pale blue between leaning walls. In Venice, drinking water does not come easily from the lagoon. The canals are brackish, so rainwater is collected in cisterns beneath certain squares. You walk toward one of these, joining others who move with the same quiet intention. The square is still half in shadow. At its center, a stone wellhead rises, modest, worn smooth by generations of hands. You lower your bucket carefully. The rope slips through your fingers, slightly rough. It descends into darkness beneath the paving stones, where rainwater has been filtered through sand and collected in an underground chamber. You draw it upward. The weight pulls at your arms. You brace your feet against stone. Lift. Settle the bucket at the rim. Water glints faintly in early light. This is not dramatic labor. It is daily necessity. You balance the container carefully and begin the walk home. The street slopes slightly. You adjust your posture to keep water steady. A small amount may spill, darkening the stone where it falls. Back inside, you climb the stairs. Step, step, step. Your breath deepens slightly by the third level. You do not pause. You have climbed these steps thousands of times. Inside the room, you set water near the hearth. There is bread to slice, perhaps fish left from yesterday to warm. You move quietly so others may sleep a little longer. Later, once the household is awake, the day expands. Laundry waits. In Venice, washing cloth often means working beside canals or in courtyards where water can be drawn. You kneel near stone steps descending into a quieter stretch of canal. The surface reflects buildings above, trembling gently. You submerge fabric. Cold water shocks your hands at first. You scrub. You rinse. You wring cloth tightly, twisting until droplets fall back into the canal. Your knees press against stone. Over time, the surface feels less harsh, though the pressure remains. Your sleeves dampen. Wind may lift a strand of hair loose from its tie. Around you, other women perform the same rhythm. Scrub, rinse, wring. There is little need for conversation. The repetition fills the space. Cloth grows heavier when soaked. You lift it carefully to carry back toward home. Water drips along the way, marking your path with temporary dark spots on stone. Back upstairs, you hang garments near the window or along a line stretched across the room. They dry slowly in the moist air. You shift them periodically to expose different sides to faint breeze. Between these tasks there is mending. Fabric tears easily in a city of narrow passages and constant movement. You sit near the small table and draw a needle through cloth. Your shoulders incline forward, your eyes narrow in concentration. Stitch, pull, tighten, repeat. You repair not only garments but linens, sacks, sometimes fishing nets if someone in the household depends on them. Your hands become skilled at invisibly joining separated threads. There may also be paid work. Some women serve in larger households, ascending grand staircases to clean floors and polish surfaces that rarely feel damp because they are maintained constantly. Others assist in workshops, trimming threads, preparing materials, delivering finished goods. In noble homes, women move quietly through corridors carrying trays, adjusting curtains, sweeping marble floors that feel cold even in summer. But most days are contained within modest walls. You prepare meals carefully to stretch provisions. You slice bread thinly. You boil grains. You add herbs for flavor. You calculate silently how long supplies must last. In summer, heat complicates everything. Cloth dries more quickly but spoils more easily. Food must be watched. The air grows thick, pressing gently against skin. Sweat forms at the back of your neck as you stir a pot over flame. In winter, damp cold lingers. You rub your hands together before beginning work. Water drawn from the well feels sharper against skin. Cloth stiffens slightly before drying near the hearth. There is always something unfinished. a sleeve needing repair, a floor needing sweeping, a pot needing scrubbing, the stairwell echoing with someone calling your name. You descend, you ascend, you descend again. Your calves grow accustomed to the steady incline of Venetian buildings. The city does not acknowledge this labor formally. It does not record the number of steps climbed each day, but without it, households would falter. Children would wear torn garments. Meals would not appear. Water would not be carried. In the late afternoon you may lean briefly at the window. The canal below reflects fading light. A gondola passes slowly. Voices drift upward, softened by distance and stone. You rest your hands on the sill. They are roughened slightly from water and cloth. Fine lines form earlier than they might elsewhere, etched by constant dampness and motion. You do not dwell on it, because tomorrow will require the same. There are also quieter burdens, limited rights, dependence on the stability of husbands, fathers, employers. If illness enters the household, your work multiplies. You fetch additional water. You prepare broths. You sit through the night beside a restless body. Sometimes morning comes with relief. Sometimes morning does not come for everyone. But even then tasks remain. Water must be drawn. Cloth must be washed. Life continues. As evening settles now, you finish the final mending stitch. You fold the garment carefully and set it aside. The oil lamp flickers gently. Shadows gather in corners of the room. You lower yourself onto the bed slowly, feeling the day in your knees and wrists. Beyond the wall, neighbors murmur softly. Below, water touches stone in its steady pattern. You think of the well in the square, of the rope sliding through your fingers, of cold water rising from darkness. You think of laundry dripping back into canals, of steps climbed and descended, of hands that rarely rest fully, and you understand something quiet and enduring. Venice survives not only on trade and spectacle, but on invisible repetitions performed inside narrow rooms and along canal edges. Scrub, rinse, wring, climb, mend, repeat. The tide rises and falls outside. Inside you continue. Let your breathing soften again now. Imagine cool water in a stone well, the faint echo of rope against its rim, and the steady rhythm of hands at work. If you live in 1700s Venice and your family is noble, your life is not unburdened. It is simply burdened differently. You wake in a high room, wide enough that your bed does not touch walls on all sides. The ceiling soars above you, adorned with faded frescoes, not new, not gleaming, but carrying the weight of generations. Your window opens onto a canal bustling with gondolas. Light falls more generously here, yet it is still filtered by distance, by height, by the curve of the buildings. You rise slowly. There is a quiet expectation of presence. A footman or servant may already have attended to minor details, opened shutters, brought water, arranged linens. Yet even in these spaces, you cannot escape rhythm. There is always some expectation of appearance. Clothing must be arranged, hair braided or powdered, shoes polished, gloves clean. You dress in layers of silk, linen, and velvet, heavy even in summer. The weight is familiar. It shapes the way you move. Each step across the polished floor is measured. The echo is different here, wider, more resonant than in the narrow streets of ordinary citizens. Sound carries farther. Mistakes do too. Meals appear at intervals. Breakfast is modest but precise. Perhaps a plate of bread, a few slices of cheese, a poached egg. A servant arranges it before you. The taste is not what sustains you. The ritual does. Order, presentation, regularity. Beyond your private chambers, the palazzo is layered. Corridors stretch in angles that seem to multiply as you walk. They are long and echo with history. Paintings, portraits of ancestors in stiff formal poses, hang along the walls. Light from high windows illuminates dust motes, revealing subtle movement where it might go unnoticed otherwise. In some wings, rooms are rarely used. They are kept for visitors who may not arrive for months. They remain ready, silent. Their emptiness is deliberate, preparation is constant, maintenance of presence is as important as actual occupancy. Servants move with precision. Footsteps are careful. Whispered words carry instructions or observations. Meals must arrive punctually. Fires must burn. Candles must be trimmed. Floors must be swept with care, dust displaced, corners cleaned. You are aware of each movement because the walls are high and hard. Sound travels differently in grand spaces than in cramped apartments. The echo amplifies mistakes, even small ones. You learn to move deliberately, quietly, almost in collaboration with the building itself. Outside, Venice continues in soft rhythm. Canals shimmer in morning light. Gondoliers row slowly. Water laps gently against foundations. The city hums but not loudly. You may hear it faintly above the palazzos' floorboards, through the shutters, through the open corridors. Guests may arrive for afternoon calls, nobles from other palaces, their demeanor formal, their eyes measuring. Conversations revolve around family, trade, politics, subtly. Each word is measured, each smile considered. The burden of status is quiet but persistent. Still, life in a noble palazzo is not only about ritual. There is labor here, too, though performed by others. Servants and artisans within the household carry weight. The polish of floors, the cooking of meals, the preparation of garments, the maintenance of walls and windows that must remain impeccable. You move through the day with awareness of these layers. Afternoon brings light shifting across the high rooms. Faded frescoes are more visible in certain angles. The air is thickened by warmth in summer, dry in winter. Drafts creep subtly beneath doorways. You adjust, perhaps moving a chair, perhaps requesting a servant's assistance. Sometimes you walk to the piano nobile, the main floor, and pause near a balcony. Below, the canal ripples. The canal ripples. Boats pass in slow rhythm. The hum of city life continues. You do not step into it fully. You observe. The distance between you and ordinary streets is both physical and symbolic. Yet this distance is not comfort without cost. Expectation demands awareness, vigilance, and subtle management. Every gesture matters. Every omission may ripple through household dynamics. You learn to weigh each movement, to anticipate, to respond without excess. Evening approaches. The palazzo shifts in tone. Candles are lit in succession. Shadows grow and lengthen along walls. The hush deepens. Servants move quietly, ensuring that the household maintains its order. Meals are served in formal dining rooms. Silverware arranged, plates precisely placed. Conversation flows in controlled measure. You may eat slowly, deliberately, each bite measured. You are conscious of posture, tone, and attention. Even fatigue is moderated, softened, made subtle. As night deepens, private rooms once again receive your presence. You climb stairs, possibly multiple flights to your sleeping chamber. The ceiling beams overhead are not raw as in common apartments, but finished, polished, perhaps painted or gilded. Still they lean slightly with age. They absorb sound differently. You hear their subtle groan beneath weight and temperature changes. You lie down. Perhaps a servant has arranged bedding with care. Perhaps a window is opened to catch the evening air. The city murmurs outside. Gondolas pass silently. Water reflects candlelight from other buildings shimmering across walls. Here, inside a noble palazzo, you understand something quietly pressing. Privilege brings comfort, yes, but it also brings subtle vigilance. Endurance is not absent. It is transformed. Because even in grandeur, survival in Venice is measured by awareness, rhythm, and attention. By the steady repetition of small acts that uphold both self and structure. And as you drift into evening, you feel Venice in layers. The narrow rooms above narrow streets, the docks with their steady labor, the shadowed workshops, and now these high rooms with weighty ceilings, all converging quietly, relentlessly, under the city's rhythm, under the gentle pulse of water against stone. If you live in 1700s Venice, and are not the noble family, you are likely a servant inside their palazzo. Your life begins long before the household stirs. You wake in small rooms, perhaps shared with others, where the air carries residual warmth from sleeping bodies, or damp chill if the winter reaches indoors. Floors are stone or wood, narrow, often uneven. You rise quietly, mindful of the need to avoid disturbing anyone above. There are tasks to perform immediately. Candles must be trimmed, firewood moved closer to hearths, water brought from cisterns, floors inspected for damp spots or dust. Even the arrangement of furniture, subtle as it seems, is scrutinized by those who inhabit these high-ceilinged rooms. You descend into the early morning corridors, your steps careful against polished stone. The echo is constant, a reminder that mistakes are audible. In the silence before the household awakens, every sound you make carries weight. Meals must be prepared and presented. Bread sliced, fish warmed, eggs poached, everything arranged with care. If the family eats early, timing is precise. If guests are expected, preparation becomes even more delicate. Silverware must gleam. Linen must be immaculate. Candles aligned. Plates balanced. The city outside continues in soft rhythm. Gondolas glide slowly along canals. Dockworkers haul cargo in the distant basin. Artisans shape glass and weave cloth. You are aware of this rhythm only faintly, a distant echo through walls and shuttered windows. Your focus is entirely inward, on the mechanics of sustaining the household. During the day you move continuously. You serve, you clean, you carry, you sweep. You monitor small details that, if unattended, could disrupt appearances or functionality. Nothing is sudden. No one raises alarm, yet failure has consequence. A misaligned table, a scorched dish, a neglected stairwell. You climb stairs multiple times. You carry water or food. You adjust light sources. You ensure that rooms intended for visitors are ready, even if no visitors arrive. Preparation is perpetual. It does not end when you rest. It resumes the next day as soon as the light allows. Fatigue is quiet. It settles into your shoulders, into the arches of your feet, into the backs of your hands. You learn to mask it while performing repetitive tasks. You adapt to constant motion. The day is long, but its pace is consistent. Sometimes your duties extend outside. A trip to the market, a brief escort along the fondamenta to retrieve a package, or a careful coordination of goods arriving from ships in a lagoon. Each task involves navigating narrow streets, crossing canals, stepping onto boats if needed, and returning with items without mishap. The weight you carry is literal and metaphorical. It is part of sustaining not only the household but the veneer of stability that noble presence demands. By evening, light fades. Shadows deepen in corridors and stairwells. Candles are lit in succession, softening the darkness. You continue monitoring the household, extinguishing unnecessary flames, ensuring that fires do not die too soon, that floors remain free of stray debris, that windows close against damp or draft. Only after noble members retire do you take small breaths. Tasks are never entirely done. Small details linger, requiring attention tomorrow. Yet for a moment you pause. You sit on a bench or lean lightly against a wall. Your hands rest, fingers slightly stiff from repeated motions. Your back aches subtly from climbing stairs and lifting supplies. The city outside quiets as night deepens. Gondolas still move, their oars dipping rhythmically. Water laps against foundations. The air carries salt and coolness. You feel Venice's pulse more subtly here. Not as laborers or artisans feel it, but as the silent intermediaries sustaining grandeur from within. You know the household cannot function without you, and yet recognition is not offered formally. There is no ceremony marking your contribution. It is assumed, expected, continuous. You endure. You repeat. You move in rhythm with the unseen tides of the household, just as the city moves in rhythm with the tide outside. Eventually you retire to your room. You remove damp or soiled garments. Your body bears faint traces of the day, slight marks on hands, a subtle ache in shoulders, a lingering scent of food or candle smoke. You lie down. Outside, water touches stone. Somewhere distant, a gondola passes. The city breathes quietly, and you, in your small shadowed space, allow your body to rest, knowing that tomorrow will demand the same quiet endurance. The palazzo, noble family, servants, and city form layers, overlapping, dependent, and continuous. Each layer moves in measured rhythm. Each requires attention. Each sustains the one above and below. And in the hush of night, all layers pause, softly, momentarily, before the city resumes once again with the tide. If you live in 1700s Venice as a member of the noble class, leisure is not always light. It is a kind of work, a quiet, continuous attention to appearance, propriety, and subtle social expectation. You wake after servants have already prepared the household for the day. Sunlight filters through tall, narrow windows. The floorboards are polished. The air is cool, carrying a faint scent of salt from the lagoon outside. You dress with care. Layers of silk, velvet, and lace press softly against your body. You adjust folds, collars, and fastenings with deliberate patience. Each movement is conscious, each gesture measured. Breakfast appears with silent efficiency. Bread, cheese, fruit, if available. Tea or coffee arrives in small porcelain cups. You eat slowly, deliberately, because haste is seen as improper, and moderation is a mark of refinement. Every sip and every bite is noted in your own awareness, even if no one else observes. Afterwards the day unfolds quietly. You may move to a balcony overlooking the canal. Gondolas pass slowly. Merchants, porters, artisans continue their labor below. You observe, detached but not indifferent. The movement of the city carries subtle lessons about patience, endurance, and rhythm. Your leisure is layered. Perhaps you read. Perhaps you write letters to relatives in distant cities. Perhaps you walk carefully along private corridors or in small palazzo gardens. Every action carries silent weight. To be idle is impossible. To exist without attention to detail is impossible. Even reading is bounded by awareness, posture, page-turning, gesture. Sometimes music fills rooms, a small harpsichord, a lute, or a distant violin. The notes are soft, controlled, not exuberant, not celebratory. They fill the palazzo with gentle cadence. You may practice or simply listen, allowing the sound to flow slowly across walls and floor, tracing shadows as light shifts with the day. Outside, the city continues in layered rhythm. Boats glide past. Water reflects the late morning sun. The faint smell of fish, wood, and stone drifts upward. You hear distant voices, dockworkers moving cargo, artisans shaping glass or weaving cloth, women drawing water or mending garments. These sounds are part of the backdrop, never intrusion, yet ever present. Conversations with guests or family members are equally measured. Words are chosen for precision, politeness, and subtle implication. You notice the way eyes shift, how hands rest on chairs, how posture communicates hierarchy and understanding. The weight of observation is constant. You listen and respond carefully. Meals later in the day follow similar patterns. Lunch is deliberate, presented with attention to arrangement and proportion. Dinner, if served with guests, is a choreography of service and etiquette. Candles are lit with precision. Floors are inspected for stray dust. Chairs are aligned. Plates balanced. The household runs like a quiet machine, maintained by servants whose work is largely invisible but essential. Even leisure involves endurance. You navigate corridors, climb staircases, and manage rooms that may be barely used. Faded frescoes overhead and portraits on walls remind you of lineage, continuity, and expectation. The building itself exerts quiet pressure. Its weight is both literal and symbolic. Ceilings above, stone beneath, water slowly shifting, foundations below. You may pause by a window in the late afternoon. The lagoon reflects gold and amber light. A gondola drifts slowly past. You feel a subtle connection to the city, distant yet intimate. Observation is a form of quiet labor, attention to rhythm, light, movement, and gesture. It is a task that endures beyond the day's formalities. By evening, Lamps are lit, the palazzo softens into shadow. Music may play again. Conversation slow. Guests depart. Candles flicker across walls. The quiet weight of expectation persists. But for a moment you may allow yourself to simply exist, aware of layers beneath and beyond, servants moving silently, canals breathing beneath the city, labor continuing in shadowed workshops, streets and docks. As night deepens, you lie in bed, the ceiling beams above, the polished floors below, and the distant reflection of water outside all hold the palazzo together. You feel your own body resting, yet attentive. Sleep comes slowly, softened by the constant rhythm of life, and the knowledge that morning will return with the same layers of duty, observation, and quiet endurance. In Venice, even privilege is measured not only by what you own, but by your attention, rhythm, and ability to maintain continuity. And in that maintenance, the city continues, fragile, patient, beautiful, and imperceptibly precarious. You breathe slowly, matching the subtle undulation of gondolas passing outside. The city is awake, yet muted. The palazzo holds, as it always has, a quiet equilibrium between water, labor, and lineage. And in this silence you feel the pulse of Venice, not dramatic, not loud, just persistent, steady, and alive. If you live in 1700s Venice, much of the city's energy passes through its markets. You wake early, before full daylight, to smell salt on the air and the faint sweetness of fish. The canals shimmer faintly in the gray morning light, reflecting buildings that lean slightly with age, their foundations pressed into water and mud. You dress simply, linen and wool against the cool air. Your shoes make soft contact with damp stone as you walk along the fondamenta toward the market square. Already the city is stirring. The first merchants have arrived. Wooden carts creak faintly as they are moved into position. Barrels are rolled carefully. Crates are lifted onto tables. Fish glint faintly on ice, still cold from the night. Fruit sits in neat piles, apples, pears, figs, muted in tone, not vivid like a painting, but subdued by early morning light and the haze of lagoon air. You notice the rhythm immediately. Movement is slow but deliberate. Merchants call softly to one another, arranging goods and shifting crates. The language is not sharp or loud, it is measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of routine rather than urgency. You walk past stalls. The smell of salt and damp wood mixes with the earthy aroma of grains and vegetables. You see women balancing baskets on heads or arms, carrying goods home for family meals. Men adjust ropes, securing barrels of wine or olive oil. Children linger nearby, small hands occasionally touching crates or slipping among legs, observing without interfering. Coins change hands in quiet exchange. Negotiation is subtle, not dramatic, not loud. A merchant may adjust a price slightly. A buyer nods. The transaction is more about continuity than victory. Everyone knows the rhythm. It repeats day after day. You pause to watch the fishmonger at work. He lifts a flat wooden tray, arranging his catch with steady hands. A faint mist rises from the ice as sunlight touches it. Water drips slowly from the fish onto stone. You smell the faint metallic tang, tempered by the damp air of the canals. Nearby, a spice seller opens small jars of dried herbs. The scent is faint in this early light, not overwhelming, subtle as it blends with water and wood. You inhale quietly, recognizing that even aroma is part of rhythm, seasoning, preservation, and trade all measured in small increments. Time passes slowly. You feel the weight of walking among crates, stones, and puddles left from earlier tides. Your feet adjust unconsciously to uneven surfaces. The chill seeps through fabric. Dampness settles into shoes. Your fingers brush against wooden posts or ropes. Each touch reminds you of the texture of the city, its continuity, and your place within it. Some vendors begin preparing small midday meals. Flatbreads warmed over coals, fish grilled simply. You hear the faint hiss of oil. Steam rises softly. It is not enticing or dramatic, it is ordinary, sustaining, essential. People eat quietly, or they pause only briefly before returning to work. The square grows gradually brighter. Light touches rooftops, reflections shimmer along water. Gondolas move past slowly, transporting goods, not passengers. The market operates as part of a larger ecosystem, a subtle pulse connecting canals, homes, workshops, and palaces. You recognize your part within it, observer, participant, witness to quiet persistence. By mid-morning the pattern stabilizes. Merchants shift crates. Buyers arrive and depart with measured steps. Movement slows slightly in the heat of the day. Conversations soften. The city exhales faintly. You walk along the edges, feeling the pulse of labor, trade, and endurance that sustains Venice quietly, almost imperceptibly, beneath its more visible beauty. The market will continue until late afternoon. Crates will be emptied, fish sold, fruit rearranged. By evening, the square will quiet again. Piles of refuse will be swept or washed away. Water will carry faint traces of human rhythm back into canals. And when night arrives, the city will pause only briefly before the rhythm begins again with the tide and the dawn. You leave the square, walking along canals that glisten under soft morning light. You inhale the air of salt, wood, and subtle smoke. Your steps are measured. You feel your connection to the city's pulse, persistent, layered, enduring. If you live in 1700s Venice, the day often ends not at home, but in small, quiet taverns that line narrow canals or tucked away fondamenta. The air inside is warmer than outside. Smoke from cooking or a small hearth curls lazily toward beams overhead. The light is dim, amber-tinted from oil lamps and candles. You step carefully along uneven stone floors. Chairs and tables are arranged with intention, not disorder. Patrons sit in small clusters, their conversation low, measured. You find a spot near a window or hearth. The tavern smells of bread, stewed vegetables, simmering fish. Sometimes there is wine, red, dark, faintly sharp in scent. You sip slowly, not for pleasure alone, but as a marker of rhythm, of transition from day's labor to evening's observation. Voices drift around you, stories told quietly. An older man recounts his journey delivering goods across canals, avoiding the rising tide and keeping fragile barrels steady. A woman speaks softly of her work in a distant workshop, sewing garments by lamplight. The tales are not dramatic. There are no explosions or triumphs. They carry quiet endurance, repetition, survival. You listen. You notice pauses, the way gestures punctuate speech. Fingers press lightly on tables. Eyes meet briefly before looking away. Laughter is low, almost hesitant, fading quickly into murmurs. This is not reveille. It is the subtle sharing of time and effort, of labor and observation. Meals appear quietly, a loaf of bread sliced and shared, a small portion of fish or stew passed carefully between neighbors. You eat slowly, deliberately, savoring texture and warmth. Hands, still carrying faint traces of day's work, rest on the table. You may feel slight stiffness from walking, carrying, standing. Fatigue is soft, pressing, ever present. Outside, the canals reflect fading light. Gondolas drift past. Faint ripples echo the rhythm of the lagoon. Smoke and vapor rise toward the evening sky. Your eyes follow the subtle movements, the gentle shifting of shadows and light. You recognize continuity, the water, the boats, the slow motion of city life, the passage of tasks from one person to the next. Stories continue quietly. A young man speaks of a lost shipment, recovered only after careful negotiation. An elderly woman recounts repairing garments for children she will never see again. Each narrative is small in scope but carries weight, a reminder of endurance and persistence in ordinary life. You notice gestures, hands wringing, cups held firmly, slight nods of agreement. You feel the soft pressure of communal observation, not judgment, but the quiet understanding of shared routine. Even fatigue here is collective. Everyone bears it, just enough to remain conscious of continuity. As evening deepens, light softens further. Flames flicker along walls. Shadows grow and stretch. Patrons finish meals slowly. Conversations taper off. You rise to leave, stepping carefully along stone floors, feeling subtle warmth from lamps fading into night. Outside, the air is cooler. Damp stone presses against your shoes. Water laps softly against foundations. You walk home slowly, listening to the subtle chorus of night, distant voices, the gentle splash of gondola oars, the faint lapping of canal water against stone. The city exhales quietly, carrying the accumulated rhythm of labor, observation, and endurance from early morning to twilight. Evening in Venice is not loud. It is measured, persistent. It holds layers of activity, markets, workshops, palaces, taverns, all overlapping in subtle cadence. You move through it, feeling both participant and observer. Your body bears traces of the day, faint fatigue in legs, slight stiffness in hands, warmth in your chest from brief meals and soft light. As night fully settles, you reach home. Doors close softly behind you. You remove outer layers of clothing. Your hands and arms feel slight relief from hours of motion. You pause near a window, observing canal reflections, breathing slowly. The city has not paused. It has merely shifted rhythm. The pulse is constant, faint but deliberate. You lie down. Outside, the water continues its quiet conversation with stone foundations. Inside, the city's layers of labor, trade, observation, and endurance persist invisibly, softly around you. Your eyes close gradually. Breath deepens. The day recedes. Venice endures, and you rest, attentive to the subtle pulse that will return with the tide of dawn. If you live in 1700s Venice, night transforms the city slowly, almost imperceptibly. The day's labor, in markets, workshops, palaces, and taverns, winds down. Streets grow quieter. Canals reflect the dimming sky. Shadows stretch along stone walls, rising slowly as the sun sinks and street lamps glow faintly. You walk along a fondamenta, your footsteps soft on uneven stones. The air carries a cool dampness from the lagoon. Faint smells linger: salt, fish, wood smoke, damp cloth. Your eyes adjust gradually. Shapes of gondolas appear as dark silhouettes, drifting silently on the water. Street lamps or small oil lamps in windows flicker, casting amber light onto walls and cobblestones. You notice the subtle motion of night. A cat slipping along a shadowed stair, a boat's oar brushing water gently, the distant creak of shutters settling after the day's wind. The city feels vast and layered now. Narrow streets lead to courtyards, small bridges span quiet canals, and doors remain closed behind the majority of residents. The majority of labor is done. Only faint traces continue. A gondolier returning home, a servant locking a palazzo door, the occasional night watch moving slowly along the fondamenta. You may pause at a bridge, leaning gently against stone railing. The water below ripples softly. Reflections of lamps and windows shimmer across the surface, distorted by gentle currents. You notice the patience of Venice itself, the way the city endures, quietly persistent, layer upon layer of stone, timber, and water resting together. The faint sounds of human presence blend with the natural rhythm of night. Distant footsteps, muffled voices, water lapping, and occasional creaks of wooden structures form a subtle symphony. It is quiet, steady, hypnotic, a constant pulse that continues whether anyone observes it or not. In some corners, taverns continue lightly. A few patrons linger over wine, speaking in hushed tones. A solitary lamp casts shadows along rough-hewn walls. Conversation is soft, rhythmic, almost in tandem with the subtle sway of water outside. Along residential canals, the air is cooler. Windows are shuttered. Children sleep. Women and men alike have settled into the quiet of home. Work pauses, but the city's foundations, physical and social, remain. Water continues to touch stone. Foundations and piles beneath buildings rest in contact with lagoon mud. The city is layered, both fragile and enduring. You walk slowly, observing these layers. Footfalls sound differently at night, softer, absorbed by damp stones, mirrored in quiet canals. The familiar streets appear altered, elongated. Shapes and shadows gain depth, color muted into grays and browns. The rhythm of life feels slower, more deliberate. Even a breeze carries more notice, the sound of distant water amplified in contrast to reduced daytime noise. As night deepens, lights in palaces and homes diminish. Some rooms glow faintly, a gondola passes silently. The city exhales its accumulated labor and observation, sinking into subtle, watchful calm. You feel a quiet satisfaction in observing the interplay between light, water, stone, and human presence. The city rests, yet does not cease. Its pulse continues. You pause before your door, whether home or inn, simple or grand, and breathe deeply. You carry traces of the day, fatigue in shoulders, slight stiffness in hands, warmth lingering in feet. You remove outer layers of clothing. The air inside is calm, stable. You move through familiar space slowly, deliberately, mindful of small sounds, wood settling, fire crackling softly in a hearth, faint drip of water. You lie down. Outside, water laps softly against foundations. The city has slowed, but its rhythm persists in subtle motion. The tide, the canal, the movement of shadows and light. Even in seeming silence, Venice breathes, endures, and watches, endures, and watches quietly. Sleep comes gently, gradually. Your breathing slows. Your body rests. The city, layered with labor, privilege, and endurance, persists. Calm, quiet, and continuous, waiting to rise again with dawn. The night is neither dark nor empty. It is patient. It is steady. It is alive in quiet reflection, and you rest within it, part of Venice's enduring pulse. As night deepens fully over Venice, you lie in your small room or spacious chamber and feel the city around you, quiet but persistent. The canals stretch beyond sight, dark ribbons reflecting faint light. Gondolas rest in gentle motion, oars dipping silently. Stone foundations meet water with patient endurance, carrying centuries of weight. The palaces, narrow apartments, workshops, and taverns all breathe together in subtle rhythm, a city alive but never loud. You consider the day just past. Early mornings in markets, labor beside water, careful steps in polished corridors, quiet meals in taverns, observation from high balconies, the repetitive, invisible work that keeps households running. You remember the layering of lives, artisans, servants, merchants, nobles, women drawing water, men hauling cargo, children observing from shadows. Venice thrives on repetition, on subtle endurance, on the rhythm of human bodies moving against stone, over steps, across bridges, along canals. Life here is not dramatic, not celebrated in sudden events. It is quiet, heavy, persistent. The city has its own patience. Water flows, carrying reflection and ripple. Stone absorbs motion and sound. Buildings lean slightly, hold their shape, endure with careful maintenance and gentle labor. Every layer, the wealthy observing from palaces, the servants sustaining households, the artisans maintaining trade, the market sellers exchanging goods, contributes to the unspoken harmony. You inhale slowly. The faint scent of salt water and damp stone lingers. The air carries hints of smoke, bread, herbs, and faint warmth from lamps. You feel your body soften into the mattress or bedding, shoulders releasing, back relaxing. Fatigue from the day settles fully, acknowledged and then allowed to drift away. Outside, the pulse of Venice continues. The city breathes in small motions, water lapping, boards creaking, shutters shifting in the breeze, distant oars tracing canals, faint voices carried by wind and stone. You are part of this rhythm, whether as observer, participant, or witness. Even in the stillness of night, life is not absent. It is measured, deliberate, and continuous. You may drift in and out of sleep. The city persists. Buildings lean, foundations hold, water moves, Shadows gather and disperse. Light shifts imperceptibly as the moon moves across the sky. Venice asks nothing dramatic of you. It requires quiet awareness, continuity, observation, patience, and in return it offers a form of companionship, steady, hypnotic, and patient. As your breathing slows, you feel the layering of human presence, labor, care, observation, and endurance. You understand, in a subtle and unhurried way, that survival here is quiet. Privilege and poverty alike fold into the same rhythm. Each movement measured, each repetition essential. Sleep carries you gently. Your thoughts drift over stone, water, timber, and sky. Shadows and light play quietly across walls. The city persists, carrying everyone within it. Servants, nobles, artisans, merchants, children, travelers, each a part of Venice's enduring pulse. And when the tide rises again, morning will come as it always does. Gondolas will glide once more, crates will be moved, cloth will be washed, meals will be prepared, floors swept, streets and canals will pulse with life, uninterrupted, patient, enduring. But for now you rest. Your breath softens. The city hums quietly around you. Time slows. The water licks at stone. Shadows deepen. Light flickers in distant windows. And Venice endures, calm, heavy, persistent, and quietly alive. Sleep comes fully, gently, without hurry. You are here, the city is here, and the rhythm continues.